welcome to today's session. My name is Danny, and I'm a part of... Oh, I'm hearing someone else in the other room, so I was like confused for a second. Apologies. So my name is Danny. I'm a part of the Managed Instance product group. I've been with the team since day one when Managed Instance was built as a service. And today I'm going to talk about our mobility features to go back and forth from the cloud. And that's going to be focus of our session. We really love getting in contact with you guys. So if you snap a picture of this link, this is how you can get in contact with Managed Instance Product Group. Any questions, feedback, anything at any point you'd like, we love to see your notes. So let me tell you a little bit of history. So a couple of years ago, we were thinking about this problem. Now we have SQL Server in Azure in the cloud, and we have SQL Server on-prem. And how do we connect these two worlds? How do we make it easier for the data to flow between the two worlds? And internally at Microsoft, we love naming projects with all kinds of different internal names. So this project was internally named Project Chimera. Chimera is this mythological beast from Greek mythology, which is kind of combination of different animals. So we thought that might be a good name for the project. And then one of our designers made the logo, which kind of you can see the wings are the old school SQL Server logo, and the two heads are like Azure SQL databases. So that for us was internal project name, and that's what we started with. So I thought it'd be maybe interesting to share a bit of history and how this project started. Even internally now at Microsoft, when we say Project Chimera, people know what we're talking about, which today is known as MI-Link as a product. So a little bit about MI-Link as a feature, as a general overview. So it is a tool technology that enables you hybrid connectivity between SQL Server and Managed Instance. And that allows you to emerge into Azure at your own pace. We heard a lot of times that before that the customer choice was either to migrate to Azure or not. And that was really difficult. I mean, you need to make a decision either to migrate to Azure, or you don't know what's going to be waiting for you there, if everything is going to work out. With the link, we have built the bridge that enables you actually to use Azure without migrating to Azure. And then when you're ready, you can fail over, and you can also fail back. But I think a picture speaks more than 1,000 words. So we're leveraging the always-on technology. More specifically, on top of AGs, we've leveraged distributed availability groups. It's a technology present since SQL Server 2016, which enables two remote AGs to be connected over vast geographical distances. And the latency, network latency amongst vast geographical distances is a problem, because if you would have an AG, and especially synchronized AG, across two data centers in two different parts of the world, definitely the replication to secondary will slow primary, and everything would be slow. So distributed availability groups are a solution built in SQL Server 2016 to solve this problem, and then we've just leveraged it and reused it in the cloud. So your database replicated from SQL Server on-premise is read-write, and then when it's replicated to Managed Instance, it's read-only. It's an exact replica, exact copy. We copy user databases only, so this does not apply to copying system databases or logins or anything like that. That would need to be orchestrated otherwise. In terms of the use cases, this is what's shown here is a use case, for example, where you can use Azure without migrating to it. You can keep the link running forever for as long as you need, weeks, months, years at a time. And then you can also offload your read-only workload to Azure if you want to. We have some customers who, for example, wanted to remain running on SQL Server on-prem, and their workload is very critical, and so they do not want to move to cloud, but they wanted to they had a lot of stress on their primary server, and they wanted to offload read-only to the cloud. So they've established MI-Link, and all of their reporting and analysis and all of that is done in the cloud, and that really was helpful to them because it saved the time for them. It spared their SQL Server as a primary. Another use case maybe that I could point out in related to this is some customers had complex ETL workloads and they were doing CDCs and kind of seeing what has changed and replicating that. And that was complex to maintain. Anytime you add a table or change thing, then you need to update the pipeline, which was complex. The link, as with always-on technology, replicates the entire database near real time. As long as there's a commit, as soon as there's a commit on primary, it's automatically replicated to secondary. So this is instantaneous. So this really saved some folks a lot of time. I'm just trying to kind of paint some examples that our customers had of how they're using it. And then we're ready to migrate at some point in time. The link offers. The link possibly is the best performant minimum downtime migration solution that we have because the failover is almost instantaneous. Our other migration solutions all rely on log shipping, and as you probably are aware log shipping takes time in minutes and sometimes even longer depending on how large the backup is in the database is. So is the most performant. Is there a question?
We have a question. So the first question is, this Azure Managed Instance link disaster recovery is on private preview. When will it be public?
Yes. So there will be a section about that. I cannot disclose any specific timelines, but let's say it's going to be this year.
Thank you. And the second question is, how can we redirect selects to Managed Instance read-only and inserts, updates, deletes to our on-prem SQL Server 2022? He wants to be able to point to like a common IP address, like a listener, and then have traffic for the different workloads diverted.
Currently, there is no listener. So currently, we do not have a listener endpoint like AEGs have. That's something that we're working on. It will be a bit different than on-prem because the infrastructure is different. It's going to be related to DNSs and DNS aliases. So we're building that solution. For the time being, you would need to use two connection strings. So we need to use connection string to SQL Server and connection string, separate connection string to MI at this point in time. Thank you. All right, so how does it work technically? So distributed availability groups span amongst two different availability groups. Important to say, and this is a question that I've been asked a lot, for managed instance, we have general purpose and we have business critical service tier. Business critical service tier has always on, whereas our general purpose service tier has FCI for availability, failover clustering. So customers ask, will this work on general purpose managed instances? So the answer is yes, because underneath, although GP, our general purpose managed instances use FCI for high availability, we also have local AGs on them. So this will work both on AG, on our business critical and general purpose managed instances, so all service tiers. In terms of supportability, and today also I have some announcements. So for the older SQL Server version, so we support 2016 and up, and the replication one way to the cloud, so without the ability to fail back, is available for 2016 and 19. We have also made this solution available in standard editions as well, which was an effort because distributed availability groups are not available out of the box in standard editions, so we had to build that in. There are CUs and service updates, which you can find out on MI-Link documentation page that you need to install, which enable this. This is only for the purpose of MI-Link, so we did not enable it for SQL Server to SQL Server distributed availability groups, but specifically for this scenario. 2022, one link replication for 2022, it's in GA. For 16 and 19, it's a preview, and we are planning to GA that very soon, maybe just a couple of months' time. And the ability to go back, to fail back, is available to SQL Server 2022 only, and that's because of the technical limitations between MI and 22, and I will have a separate section on that, where I will explain that in details. 2017 is coming. We plan to do that by the end of this year. The only reason why we did not do it was just prioritization. We were focusing on building the DR with 2022. 2022 had to ship last November, so we had to focus resources on that. So 2017 support is coming. And also in terms of tooling support, Some of the older versions are supported with automated wizards in SMS 18, but I would recommend to go to SMS 19 as we have the latest updates in there for this solution. And then we have also built automated scripts. If you want to use PowerShells to automate everything, to script everything, you can do that. Now, let's have a little demo. Let's see how easy it is to establish the link between SQL Server and Managed Instance. Here I have SQL Server, in this case 22, it could be 2016, with SQL MI demo database. Then I have Managed Instance with no databases on it. Then I use our automated wizard, Azure SQL Managed Instance link, then replicate database. There's something new we have built since SMS 18. I started, it checks for all the basics that are there. A database needs to have a full backup. That's one of the requirements, so it makes sure that it checks that. I select a database that I want to replicate. I need to sign into Azure. I was previously signed into Azure, so it has remembered that I was logged in. I choose a resource group in Azure. Now what it's doing, it's pulling all the managed instances that I have across my subscriptions that I can connect to. And then when that list is populated, then I will be able to select the managed instance to which I want to replicate this database. So let's say I want to pick this one. Then this is advanced settings. For all intents and purposes, you can click next for all the novice users. But this is where you can customize AG and DAG settings. So if you do not have an AG available, we'll build one for you. It can be a single node, so we do not require you to have an AG setup. We do not require you to have Windows Server failover cluster. It can be just a single node SQL Server, and we build this local AG for you just to make the replication possible. Make sure that you ensure that the IP address of your SQL Server is correct, because sometimes people have two IP addresses, so it needs to be addressed that's accessible by Azure. Then we execute a number of steps. There are certificates exchanged for security, and then the link is established. Then I can query on the SQL Server DMV. I see that the database is seeding. And this seeding will take as long as, this seeding will depend on the size of your database. For larger databases, it's going to take longer time. But once the seeding is completed, then all the commits on the primary are near real time available in the secondary. So because there's a small database, I can see that seeding has been completed. And that's how easy it was to create the link. So any transaction, any record now I make to primary, as long as it's committed on the primary, it's committed near real time on the secondary as well. Some of the feature characteristics that I'd like to point out, a lot of time we get asked how resilient the link is. So for example, if there's a loss of network connectivity, or maybe you're patching the server or doing something on the server, maybe rebooting, no problem at all. Link, if there's a loss of network connectivity or you're rebooting the server, the replication will stop at that point, and as soon as the primary, your SQL Server is back up, the replication will continue. There is a limitation of 100 links per one managed instance, but that is a limitation of managed instance because managed instance can have up to 100 databases today. We have a requirement of VPN connectivity between on-prem and managed instance. Or if you're using it in Azure, you can simply spin up a VM in the same VNet of the managed instance, and then the connectivity would be automatic. So really, we don't care where SQL Server is hosted. It could be any other cloud on-prem, but there needs to be VPN connectivity with Azure to make this scenario possible. And some ports need to be open, which I'm going to have a separate slide on those ports. So once again, you do not need to have AGs. Windows Server failover cluster is not required, although supported if you have it. The only supported addition to go back to restore your database back to fail back would be SQL Server 2022. A little bit more about networking. This is important. As I mentioned, there has to be VPN between on-prem environment and Azure. There are different solutions how to connect to Azure. Site to site, point to site are one of the ways to connect to Azure from your network, or use Azure Express route. Azure Express route comes at cost, but it is the most performant solution, and there are different tiers depending on of the speed of the link that you like. Then there are different pricing tiers for Azure Express route. The best way to try the MI link today is to provision a VM. So if you want to try this out quickly, go to our page in Azure Docs, MI link, and then within provision an MI, and MI is provisioned natively in a virtual network, and then just go provision a VM in the same VNet, and they will have automatic network connectivity, so you can just simply, in the VM, set up a SQL Server and check it out. Another important thing to note is that sometimes on premises, and we hear this from customers, sometimes and I want to focus on the premises part, which is on the left-hand side. Sometimes you could have several firewalls. So maybe there could be Windows. Even in Windows, you have the built-in software firewall. And then in front of it, you might have a corporate firewall. So make sure that all these points need to be worked on. Because sometimes we had a case, for example, sometimes customers has opened the physical firewall in the corporate network, but they forgot to do it on the Windows, right? And it didn't work. So the connectivity needs to be all the way through. There's an improvement that we did recently to actually help this. We've published some scripts in our documentation that help you ping the networking back and forth, so to validate the network connectivity. And soon, I can announce that soon in an SMS, we will have an addition to the wizard, which will help you test the network connectivity as one of the first steps to help you with the initial setup. How it all works technically. Each link is database scoped, so each link is made per one database. So each individual database is placed into a single AG, and then the green line would be distributed AG, and then linked to an existing AG on a managed instance. So this makes it possible to enable various scenarios of consolidation and deconsolidation, which I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. But this solution is not that great for customers that have existing AGs with multiple databases in it. At this point in time, if you have an AG with 10 databases in it, that AG is not supported for replication, so you need to have one database in an AG. It's a current limitation that we're trying to address with some future patches for SQL Server 2022. Also important to note, you can have independent databases on MI. So in MI, all of those databases replicated from on-prem are automatically backed up in Azure. So if you replicate your database on premises to managed instance, within a couple of minutes, automatic backup kicks in, and all of your on-prem content is also automatically backed up in Azure. That means that you can just use a restore command to restore the database to either a new independent database, or you can maybe, if you have other instances or other resources, you can then easily move your data. So my point is, one, your data is in Azure, it's easily movable, and it's easily accessible between all kinds of different Azure services and different kind of SQL products. Now, because this is kind of a bit more deeper technical session, I will now tell you what's happening behind the scenes when you want to create the link. So on this, we use certificates for security, for authentication between SQL Server and Managed Instance. So the first step of the communication in establishing the link is to create some certificates, and then to exchange the public keys between SQL Server and Managed Instance. And that's how trust is established. The certificate authentication can exist in parallel to Windows Auth. So on your SQL Server on-prem, you can have your domain management, you can use the Windows Auth, and then in addition to that, we put certificates on top, and then you establish this hybrid environment. Once the trust is established, then there is a communication back and forth of creating the link, of joining two AGs together, and then there's seeding and then continuous communication once the database is seeded over. The replication is asynchronous, and that's by design. because of the performance. At the time when we do migration, we will switch the link to synchronous, and then the migration will complete. Because the link is database scoped, there are possibilities to consolidate the workload like this. So for example, you had a couple of SQL servers. So a couple of SQL servers independently can run parallel links to managed instance, so you can consolidate your workload on a single managed instance. But then likewise, if you had a really huge SQL server that has overgrown in time, you've just put in the hardware, you haven't really optimized anything, and then if you want to deconsolidate that huge SQL server, you can do that to various managed instances, regardless when they're hosted. There could be in different regions. And there's something new that we, as of recent, are offering. That's the read scale out. So now it is possible to replicate a single database to multiple locations, to multiple managed instances. Currently, we do not have automated wizard support for it in SMS, but it's a manual setup. But with this now, you can truly, let's say you want to remain running on-prem on SQL Server, you want to replicate you want to quickly expand worldwide, so you can quickly provision managed instances across various regions and worldwide, and then replicate your data there for better access to your customers. So this is another small demo, kind of just to tackle the imagination of what's possible. So I'm using the existing link for my SQL MI demo database. And then I see that my SQL Server database is read-write, it's a primary, and then on managed instance database is read-only, as expected. And then on top of the managed instance on this read-only database, I have put in this Power BI report. So I'm now reading this Power BI or loading this Power BI report from managed instance. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to insert some data on the SQL Server side, and then that data will be instantaneously replicated to managed instance. And by refreshing this report, which feeds off the managed instance, I can see immediately data change. So that's how it's possible to remain running on-prem and kind of offload and shift your analytics to the cloud. Once you're ready to migrate, at that point in time, if you want to migrate to Azure, the link offers the best possible minimum downtime solution for migrations, because the failover is instantaneous. How that works technically, so we switch the async replication to synchronous, because we want to make sure that all the data gets through, that there is no data lost. Then we compare that all the transactions have drained from one side to the other, and then we cut over to the cloud. So it's a simple orchestration of migration. But let's have actually a demo. Let's see how that works. So again, coming back to the same setup that we have, same database that we've seen before, same link between the two. There is and of course we see that's read-write database primary on the SQL Server side and read-only on managed instance side. And this is important because it's going to change after the failover. So we start failover database wizard. And then I select the database that I want to migrate. And then I need to sign into Azure. That's fine. Click Next. And then I have a choice between forced and planned failover, which is the same as in AG world. So forced failover basically does not care about data loss, so it's just immediate. And planned failover there are steps in planned failover to ensure that there is no data loss or that data loss is prevented. So I prefer to do a planned failover. This is a cleanup job. So if you want to, after you're done migration, if you want to clean up the AG and DAG we have created in your server, you can do that. This is optional. And then there are steps that I've mentioned or shown in the previous diagram that are being executed. The communication is switched to synchronous. And then there are there's a comparison of LSNs to make sure that all the records have gone through, and then when that is done, failover has completed. So that's how quick that was. Now let's check if that has actually changed. So on the managed instance side, if we check the updatability of the database became read-write. So that means that it got disconnected, and now you can start using the managed instance database for read-write workloads. As mentioned at the beginning of the session, there's no, at this point in time, we don't have an automated endpoint listener, so we need to manually repoint your application connection string. That's what it is today, but then we're working on solving that. Now in this section, I'd like to talk about disaster recovery between SQL Server 2022 and Managed Instance. That's the ability to do all of this in reverse and to go back. There are two ways you can do that. We call that offline failover, which is in GA today, and then the online failover, which is in preview today. What offline means is that on any managed instance worldwide, now you can take backup and you can natively restore it to SQL Server 2022. In terms of online failback, that's a demo that I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. You would need to sign up for it. There's a link at the bottom, or you just go to our MI link homepage in Azure Docs, and you will find the same link and the same information. So obviously, offline failback takes time, because when you back up database and restore it, you have some downtime, so you need to plan for maintenance, and online is instantaneous. And we're pushing towards, hopefully this year, towards making this into open public preview, and then of course marching towards the GA. So working on pushing that forward to you guys. Now, important to say how all of this became possible. Managed Instance is always updated because we keep it the latest and greatest SQL Server version. And before, it was not possible to do something like this, to make a backup on MI and restore it back, because MI was more advanced than SQL Server 2019 at that time. But when 2022 came out, we made a decision to lock the compatibility in MI, to kind of pause a little bit of our updates that would break that compatibility. And we said, okay, we will guarantee the compatibility with SQL Server 2022 for the next 5 years. So we guarantee that you'll be able to go back. And then when the next SQL Server comes out, then again for that release, and then for the next, we're gonna have a new 5-year guarantee to go back. There will be, in the meantime, there will be features that are maybe beyond 22, like I will call them 23 or 24, just as an expression. If there are features like that, we still do not have any, but if there are features like that, more advanced than 22, then on Managed Instance side, we will offer you an option to say, hey, I want to remain, and by default, I'm compatible with 2022, or I don't care about compatibility. I want to click here, I want to opt in, I want to have all the latest features, and then you'll break the compatibility, then you will have the latest and greatest features. And then at that point in time, you will need to wait for the next release of the SQL Server to actually be able to go back if you want to. But it will be a decision depending on your needs. So let's see the demo. So this is going to be a bidirectional online demo between SQL Server 2022 and Managed Instance, with the link that has been created. And you can see on the left-hand side, I have not pointed this out, AG and DAG on the SQL Server that we have automatically created. In my demo, this is a single node system, so just a single box, single SQL Server. So what you're seeing here is available when you sign up through our preview. This is what's available through the preview. So we're checking that the SQL Server is primary. Let's read write. And then we're going to check that the MI is secondary, read only. And that is fine. And then I'm going to create a table on the SQL Server side, and then insert some records. And then on the Managed Instance side, I need to check that that record has replicated. And there it is, near real time. And then let me go back and maybe put in a couple more records. And likewise, let's check that they have replicated on MI side, so that's working fine. In this SSMS version, which we will ship to you when you join the limited preview, you'll have a new option, which is to fail over the database. And we also need to whitelist your managed instance for this capability, but then you would be able to use this. We detect that the SQL Server is primary, managed instance secondary. Click on Next, sign into Azure. It has already remembered that I was signed into Azure before. I will choose planned failover again. It's the same like with migration. Planned failover has a number of steps ensuring that there's no data loss. There's a new thing that we have built in for SQL Server 2022, which we called requires synchronized secondaries to commit. It's a functionality where when we turn it on, primary does not consider a transaction to be committed until secondary confirms transaction has been committed. What this means is that now you can fail over workloads without stopping them. So you can fail over workloads on the fly, which is really great. You don't really need to have any interaction. So I'm checking on my SQL Server side, it's read-only, so SQL Server became secondary, and my MI became primary. So I'm going to try to insert some records on the SQL Server side. I was able to do that before, but now I can't because it's secondary, and my database is read-only. But then, on the MI side, I should be able to insert some records because it's now new primary. And sure so, I can. So I'm inserting records 6 to 10. Great. But can we do this in reverse? So let's fail back. So again, just quickly running the same wizard. It has detected now that the state has been reversed, that SQL Server link is secondary and ML link is primary. Going to the sign up, that's fine. Planned failover. Executing the steps. And by the way, you can, as in any SMS wizard, you can click on script save as, and without executing these steps, you will get T-SQL, and you can manually execute these commands as well. So let's check the state, what has happened. My SQL Server is read-write, so it became primary again, and my managed instance is read-only, so it became secondary again, and I should not be able to insert records on it because it's secondary, and this is as expected. And then on the SQL Server side, I can then continue inserting records. And you can see here that I've done the full DR drill of the online failover back and forth. So from SQL Server as a primary, failed over to MI, which was new primary, inserted some data there, came back, and then inserted data on the SQL Server. So once again, reminder, all of this is available in a preview through sign up. So go to MI link page in Azure Docs, sign up. We need to whitelist. You need to have MI provisioned in advance. We will whitelist your subscription for this capability, provide the link to download a new version of SMS with this capability, and then you can use it now. And we hope that sometimes this year we can push this to open public preview. Are there any online questions? Yes, go ahead.
First, is it a good idea failing over to MI in a high activity moment to scale and get better performance on MI and then go back to on-prem?
That's actually a good question. So I would say yes. Regardless of the workload, intensity of the workload, managed instance can scale. However, sometimes it might take a little bit longer time to scale, but it's a good point in time when you need more capacity to say, hey, I want to scale. So regardless of MI link, MI was built that it can scale at any time regardless of your workload. And depending on the operation that you're making, sometimes that operation is without failover, and sometimes it is with a failover. It all depends. It depends if we need to provision a bigger or new managed instance in the back end, and then we need to do failover or not. So just be aware when you're scaling managed instance that there might be a failover, which is like a brief second, which is another important point. When you're going to cloud and when you are making any applications in the cloud, the best practices is that your applications have a built-in retry, because these failovers in cloud, because of the patches updates, SL updates, whatever, can occur, like a second, 2 seconds in availability. So retry logic in your application, if transaction fails, is always a good practice.
Thanks. The second online question is, are the readable secondaries available under the standard license?
So I will need, well, it's not technically available on a standard license, so let me explain what we exactly did. Managed instance is always an enterprise edition. So all the managed instance GP and BC are always enterprise licenses. And as such, by being an enterprise license, it offers read-only secondaries, because enterprise license in AGs always offers read-only secondaries. When your primary is a standard edition SQL Server, that primary, and we have put in DAG on top of it, such that you can replicate data to managed instance, it does not matter that your SQL Server is a standard edition. MI is enterprise, and MI can offer read scale out. And I think that answers the question. Are there any other? Yeah, need a talking box.
Could this be used as a technique to migrate from one on-prem SQL Server to another one?
How would you do that?
Well, by breaking a link, building another one, and then recreating the link, but just doing disaster recovery to a new instance.
Okay, and why would you do it that way? Why would
No,
you
I'm just brainstorming.
Yes, you could. At this point in time, we do not have a capability that you initiate the connectivity from MI. So today you need to create the connectivity from SQL Server, and you need to failover to reverse the roles. That's something that we're working on. So we call it MI first. Again, it's an internal term. It's not going to be an official term. So we will build the capability to start the connectivity from MI link, and then you'll be able to do that if you really wanted to.
Okay, thank you.
Right now, you would need to create the link from SQL Server, go to MI, failback.
Is it possible to give permissions to your MI copy of the database to Azure AD objects that the on-prem copy isn't aware of, like an MSI, for example?
If I understood the question well, and maybe you can clarify, so currently we copy only databases. We do not copy anything else. So everything else you would need to manually orchestrate.
I guess, so as an example, in Azure AD I've got an MSI that my on-prem AD isn't aware of because we're not federated that way. Can I create a contained database user in my MI copy of my database?
We do not support contained databases.
I guess then I think we're heading towards the answer of not.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So only user database. So if I understand your question well, you basically were wondering, can I copy anything else from user data, and can I make my life easier to copy jobs or users?
If I'm using my MI copy to offload, read, and so on, principally for my Azure estate, and my Azure estate is principally being authenticated using MSIs, but my on-prem copy, which is the source of the database, isn't aware of those MSIs, so I can't permission in my on-prem.
Yeah.
I guess the answer is a no for now.
The answer for that is a no, but then there are workarounds you would need. You can connect AD and AAD together, and that would be the way to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So once you join the domains, Azure and on-prem, then...
yeah, we currently sync in one way.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? How much time have we got left? 10? Okay, we're doing pretty good on time. I have just 2 more slides. So this is a bit technically how this works, the failover that I've shown back and forth. So we again, as with any failover, we start with switching from async to sync mode, which is what you see on the diagram on top. And then we turn on this new feature, required secondaries to commit. which ensures that the transaction is committed on the secondary before the primary can confirm it. And that's the purpose of that, is to not to have any data loss. So all the transaction must go through, or even if there's a failover, then the transaction will not be committed in the primary, and that's fine. It's just error out. Then what happens next is that then we switch the roles. We initiate a couple of commands. So we need to say on the SQL Server, we need to change the role. On the SQL Server, go set secondary. And then on the MI, we need to say, hey, become primary. And then those roles are reversed. And then the failover is done pretty much. The connection strings just get repointed back. And that's the first part of the screen. And the line below is just all of that in reverse. It is simpler in the sense that MI already has a built-in mechanism for required secondaries to commit, and then there's no additional step in going back. But it's pretty much the same: async to sync, switch one side, switch other side, and then failover. The next diagram is what happens in a case of a trouble if you really want to use it as a disaster recovery. So let's say the first part of the diagram, you created MI link and you're using MI as a DR in the cloud, and there's a problem. And you see on the right-hand side in the red letters at the top, and I think maybe I can point it with my mouse. Yes, that'd be better here. We essentially force failover MI to primary. There's a command for that, and then MI becomes a primary, and then you repoint your application string to the MI as a primary because your SQL Server is down for whatever reason. When your SQL Server comes up, which is this scenario here, then you optionally could back the database up on it, and then you need to execute forced failover on it to make it secondary, and then replication will continue automatically in reverse because we would assume that you have added some data on the MI side. So when the SQL Server comes up, if it's down on this side, then you need to forcefully switch it to secondary, initiate the forced failover. I think that's pretty much it. I have another example which is then just in reverse, but kind of to recap on the new scenarios that we have enabled. So one would be the disaster recovery in Azure that you have with this solution. Then if you're not interested in disaster recovery, maybe you're interested to migrate. The solution gives you reassurance, even offline, using backup and restore, and online gives you assurance that you can go back. Sometimes you really maybe have a need, if you're doing development, to get a copy of your production database, or sometimes for compliance reasons, you just need to show that you have that ability. It really provides the solution provides you with the mobility of the data regardless of where it's hosted in which cloud. And then the fourth box, and this is what gentleman asked online, you can leverage it to burst your, during peak hours, you can scale up in Azure, you can offload in Azure, and then use that temporary capacity in Azure to scale and offload when your services needs it. Let's say it's like a big sale day, holiday, whatever. If you're ready to use the link, here is, you can also search for it on the web, MI link, Azure Docs, or this link to our documentation where all the resources are provided. And this will be the end of the session. Please do leave the feedback for this session. Are there any more questions in the audience or online? I think we're pretty much at time. So please do leave feedback. I think, are we this year doing trees as well? Do you know? Are we doing trees? You don't know? So last year at SQL Bits, they told us that for every 10 feedbacks, there will be 1 tree planted. I'm not sure if that's the case this year, but let's imagine it is. I'll ask them anyhow. Let's keep those trees growing. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.